Hello and welcome to another edition of the Weekly Lineup Show. I'll be your host, Steve Vidovich here. And you can find me on Twitter at Steven Vidovich. Just going to go through this week's NBA schedule. I hope you guys are all in the fantasy playoffs, either your semifinals match or your finals match, or maybe it's a 2-week finals match. I know things vary quite a bit depending on how your league format is set up, but I hope you guys are well in the mix for the fantasy championship. I'll be going through the schedule. If you guys want to drop in any questions in the chat, I'll get to those before we wrap up in about 20-30 minutes today, depending on how active the chat is. So compared to last week, this week's schedule, we do have a little bit more of top heavy and light days. If we look at last week's schedule, we had no days with more than 8 games and no days with less than 5 games, and 6 of the 7 days of the week had 7 or 8 games. This week is going to be a little bit different. We have a Thursday that only has 4 games on the card, and Wednesday and Friday have 10 games each, and then you got 6 games on Monday, Tuesday, and Saturday, and then a 9-game slate to finish off the week on Sunday. So you basically have 3 high-volume days on Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, 3 medium-sized cards on Monday, Tuesday, and Saturday, and then a relatively light Thursday card of just 4 games on the docket. In terms of the teams with 3 games and 4 games on the schedule, that's 27 of the 30 teams have either 3 games or 4 games this week. There's only a couple, 2 teams this week that have two back-to-backs. That's going to be your Atlanta Hawks. They play Tuesday, Wednesday, and then they go again Saturday, Sunday. So they do have 4 games this week, but it does have 2 back-to-backs. So definitely something to be aware of. They don't have many guys on the Hawks that sit out in back-to-back situations. Perhaps Bogdanovich is really the only instance of somebody who is at great risk of sitting out in a back-to-back situation. But then on the Sacramento Kings, who also go Monday, Tuesday, Friday, Saturday. So they have 2 back-to-backs this week. That puts Kevin Huerter at more risk of missing time this week, as opposed to, like, let's say they had a 4-game schedule, but it was spread across Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, no back-to-backs. Then Huerter might have a better chance of playing. And let's say if he comes back, 2nd game of the week, then maybe he would have a chance of playing 3 games this week. I don't think Huerter is going to play more than 2 games this week in a best case scenario, and we very well could be looking at just 1 game of Huerter this week. That's what makes Malik Monk very interesting to stream this week. He definitely is the primary beneficiary of Huerter's absence, so definitely go ahead. I looked at Yahoo's transaction trends in recent days, and Malik Monk, for good reason, is one of the more added players. I'll get into the other guys later on the show, but the Kings, definitely going to be weary of the Kings with those 2 back-to-backs, specifically Kevin Huerter. If you're in the championship week of your matchup, Huerter, if we get word that he's out tonight, then he's a drop in most 12-team leagues, in my opinion, if you're in your championship week, because I don't really see him playing very much this week with 2 back-to-backs, even on a 4-game week. So we do have a question here from Christopher Scott. I'll get to that before I get back into the schedule. But like I said, Hawks, Kings, 2 back-to-backs this week. Definitely want to be very weary, specifically of Kevin Huerter, since he's dealing with the hamstring strain, and his 4-game week will likely be reduced to a 2-game week in a best case scenario, and a 1-game week seems highly likely. So Christopher Scott chimes in, status on Duarte Mathurin. He's got TJ McConnell. Definitely a guy that got added in a lot of places when Halliburton got ruled out for at least 3 games late last week. McConnell should continue to be a fantastic stream, at least tonight. Let's see, Pacers had them on here. They play Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. So that Friday, Saturday back-to-back, even if Halliburton returns on Wednesday, you're going to likely see him sit out one of those back-to-backs. I would bet some good chunk of change on that. So, and there's no guarantee Halliburton's back on Wednesday. In terms of Duarte and Mathurin, I don't really think it interferes with McConnell all that much. So I don't think that the Pacers are going to be in a spot to push anyone unless they are at 100%. So I know that both Duarte and Mathurin are questionable for tonight's game, Monday's game for Indiana. But I do believe that they're probably more on the doubtful side of that questionable tag. If I was to guess, it's possible one or both of them suit up, but I would put in my head that they were a little bit closer to doubtful rather than questionable. And I would stream TJ McConnell with really good confidence. If I was in a weekly lineup setting, I would start McConnell over a lot of other guys. I'd start McConnell over Malik Monk, who we mentioned before. Malik Monk gets a boost this week with Kevin Huerter's ongoing hamstring injury. I know he's questionable for tonight's game, but I don't think he's going to suit up tonight. And then they play again tomorrow on Tuesday. And then they play Friday, Saturday for a second back-to-back. But I would go with McConnell even ahead of Malik Monk in that situation. Like I said, the Pacers have a back-to-back Friday, Saturday. So Halliburton, if he does come back on Wednesday, he'll sit out most likely one of those two back-to-backs over the weekend, which boosts McConnell. And McConnell has some, low-end streaming appeal, even with Halliburton in town, especially for if he's going to have two games at least without Halliburton there. Chris goes on to ask, he's thinking about picking up Tari Eason with all the question marks on Houston. So, yeah, Jayshawn Tate's out tonight with the second leg of a back-to-back. We got Şengün is questionable, and Jalen Green is also questionable. I think the main guy to watch is Şengün in terms of helping Eason out, although Jalen Green his absence could also help Eason from a minutes perspective. Rockets, I believe, have another they don't have a back-to-back this week, but they do have a back-to-back spanning this week and next week. So that's Sunday, Monday is another back-to-back for them. So Eason is definitely an intriguing streaming option, especially if we get word that Şengün is out tonight. I think that puts another feather in his cap in terms of his appeal in a 12-team league. So I definitely think it's a reasonable ad right there, Christopher. I would play McConnell before I'd play Eason, but especially in a weekly lineup setting, I really like McConnell's week this week. We don't know when Halliburton is going to be back. Maybe he misses all 4 games for the Pacers this week, and you get 4 games of McConnell at a starting point guard with the way he's been playing. I love that play. But Eason's definitely got late round appeal with definitive upside, which you don't get with a lot of other streamers this time of the year. So I think it's a reasonable ad. Back to the schedule. We're going through the 4-game week. So there's 15 teams, half of the league, that have 4 games this week. I already went through the Hawks and the Kings have 2 back-to-backs this week. So definitely want to be wary specifically of your Kevin Huerter, which boosts the streaming appeal of Malik Monk. Maybe even Terrence Davis becomes a little bit interesting in a DFS setting if you want to take a dart throw on a certain night. So other teams that have 4 games this week, beneficial schedules. We only have 2 of the 4 game weeks. So 2 of those 15 teams don't have a back-to-back this week. That's going to be your Golden State Warriors and your Memphis Grizzlies. With no back-to-backs, that means they obviously play Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. So they're on relatively high-volume days. But, you're not at risk of any back-to-back sit-outs. I know Klay Thompson's now playing in both sets of a back-to-back. Perhaps this allows Kevon Looney to keep his Iron Man streak going, which I'd like to see continue for his sake. But Warriors, Grizzlies got really friendly schedules with no back-to-backs this week and 4 games on the docket. Let me get to Big Sid's question here in the chat. If you guys have any questions, you want to pop them in the chat, I'll get to them. We'll probably go till about 2:30 today, maybe a little earlier. So Big Sid's asking if Trey Jones is a start, even if not in starting lineup. I would say that, yeah, I would look to start him. I wouldn't be starting him over like a TJ McConnell, but Malik Monk is a guy I would consider starting Trey Jones in front of. Perhaps it depends on what stats I was looking for in that instance. But I believe in Trey Jones, even coming off the bench, has 12-team appeal. So definitely not. And even if he's coming off the bench, he might end up playing more minutes than the starters. So I like Trey Jones as a start. The Spurs play Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday this week. So you're probably looking at only 3 games for Jones because I don't see the Spurs playing him in both sets of a back-to-back. So definitely would prefer McConnell over. I'm just talking about guys that we've talked about already on the show, but I would prefer McConnell over Trey Jones. Malik Monk, they got 4 games this week, and that one's close. I'd probably lean towards Monk, assuming that Herter's going to miss most of the games this week. If we get word that Herter's back tonight, then I would lean Jones in that instance. Then we got Christopher Scott chiming back in. May as well keep it at you and me. Capella and Okongwu keep timeshare. With 4 games on the docket. Yeah, I don't see why they would go away from that. It's been working for them in the front court. I mean, they're not winning as many games as they would like, but I don't see why they would push Capella with 2 back-to-backs on the docket this week. So I could see them managing a lot of the minutes of the guys. Jalen Johnson being out helps the front court situation a little bit, but they also have John Collins there. Sadiq Bey can play power forward. So I definitely don't think they're going to push anyone's minutes too high this week with 2 back-to-backs. So timeshare for sure for Capella and Okongwu. So back to the schedule this week, I was saying the Warriors, Grizzlies got really friendly schedules with no back-to-backs. All of the other teams have at least or have 1 back-to-back this week. We already talked about the Kings and the Hawks that have 2 back-to-backs. So your other, what is that? That would be 11 teams that have 4 games this week, all have at least 1 back-to-back. Perhaps it's not within the week, but it spans a week. Like the Bulls, for instance, they don't have a back-to-back inside of this week, but they do have a Sunday, Monday back-to-back at the end of the week. Same could be said for the Dallas Mavericks. One thing of note on the Dallas Mavericks, for those of you who play your fantasy playoffs into next week, is the Mavericks have 4 games next week, but they have 2 back-to-backs. So they have a Sunday, Monday back-to-back, and then they have another back-to-back sometime next week. That makes Luka Doncic even scarier for those of you who are obviously holding on to Doncic with the hope that he returns Wednesday for hopefully a 3-game week this week. But he, in my opinion, is at great risk of sitting out those back-to-back situations, sitting out at least 1 leg of their upcoming 2 back-to-backs that go Sunday, Monday to end this week. And then they have 1 in the middle of next week. Kyrie Irving is also a guy that could sit out in a back-to-back situation. I would throw Tim Hardaway Jr. in that mix because he's been popping up as questionable quite a bit. And then maybe even Christian Wood might sit out in one of those back-to-backs. So Dallas Mavericks, they are the only team on the schedule who has 2 back-to-backs next week. So they're definitely a team that is a little bit scary, specifically Luka, for obvious reasons, because of that thigh strain. Scary player to roster right now, even though he's been terrific for the majority of the season. I'll go back to the schedule, answer these questions here. If you guys have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat here, helping you guys try to win your championships. If I had Jarrett Allen on my IR and I also had Aaron Gordon, would I drop Aaron Gordon to bring Jarrett Allen back in? Aaron Gordon is likely, I guess, your worst player in that situation. And you obviously don't have any other players to put on your IR in exchange to bring Allen back. The Nuggets play Wednesday, Saturday this week, but they do have a 4-game schedule next week. I'd like to not drop Aaron Gordon. The Cavs don't play until Tuesday, so I'd like to know a little bit more on like what your timeline is. If this is a weekly lineup setting and you felt like you needed Jarrett Allen in your starting lineup to help you get the win this week, then I think you have to make the move, drop Gordon and put Allen in there. If you're in a daily lineup setting and you can sit on Jarrett Allen for another day, Aaron Gordon and Jarrett Allen both don't play today. So I would always prefer to punt until Tuesday. Maybe something happens and you have another player on your roster that you can swap into that IR spot for Allen and you don't need to drop Aaron Gordon, and that's in a daily lineup setting. In a weekly lineup setting, 2 games this week for the Nuggets. You got 3 for the Cavs, but what if Allen doesn't end up playing on Tuesday? Then you're really looking at just 2 games for the Cavs too. So I don't know if I would even make that move in a weekly lineup set. There's like some risk there because Jarrett Allen might not play on Tuesday. I at least haven't gotten word since I went live at 2:00. So I'd like to get a little bit more information from you, Dion, on what your timeline is. Are you daily lineup setting? Are you weekly lineup settings? Is there somebody else on your roster that you might be able to drop who's more of a stream-worthy guy? But if you're in a weekly lineup setting, I would probably go ahead and make that move. Allen has higher upside than Aaron Gordon. I would probably make that move, but it's tough. It's really tough this time of year. If Allen doesn't end up playing on Tuesday, then I think it might end up being a wash, and maybe even Aaron Gordon would be your preferred option because Allen will probably have his minutes limited in his first game back. He might struggle, be a little rusty out of the gate. So it's really close for me. I think I'd lean towards making that move in a weekly lineup setting. In a daily lineup setting, I would punt another day, punt another 24 hours. We got Michael chiming in the chat. Do I think Harden rests in their back-to-back? Middleton, Lopez in back-to-back. So let's see. Harden and the Sixers, they play Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday this week. I don't really know if Harden's going to sit out in their back-to-back game over the weekend. That's Friday, Saturday. I don't know. Let's put it at a questionable tag, a 50-50% that he sits one of those 2 games. If I was to have to guess, that would be my guess there. But, the Sixers, for what it's worth, they have 4 games this week without any back-to-backs. So Harden's looking really nice for next week, as is all of your other key Sixers players. Chris Middleton and Brooke Lopez. Let's see. The Bucks, they go Wednesday, Friday, Saturday this week. So that back-to-back situation would hurt you even more than the Sixers because at least they have Harden would at least give you 3 games this week. Middleton, I believe he played in his first back-to-back just recently. I would say that they're going to try to play Middleton in both games of the back-to-back set, but I think it's going to depend on how he's feeling after Friday's game. They'll probably make a decision on Saturday. I'd call that a 50-50 proposition. And Brook Lopez, I think as long as he's healthy, I think he's going to play in both back-to-back legs. So again, I guess it depends on how he feels on Saturday morning, how the body feels. Everyone's banged up this time of year, really hard to say, but I'll label them all as questionable. Middleton probably at the greatest risk of sitting out one leg. Then I'd put Harden in your second pole position, and then Lopez at the end of the pack there. That's the way I would rank them in terms of probability. But I think they're all pretty close to 50-50 chance of sitting out a back-to-back. So I don't know is chiming in the chat here. IDK. Does he want to drop quickly and Herter for Nembhard and Naismith? So Naismith's had some really, really excellent shooting games over the last couple. I think you definitely want to wait for the word on Benedict Mathurin and Chris Duarte on both of these ads. If even one of those guys returns to action tonight, I think it probably takes Nembhard off the board from a streaming perspective. Naismith is the other guy there, and I think he has a better shot even if you get, let's say Duarte returns and Mathurin remains out. I think Naismith would be a guy worth taking a shot on. I don't know what situation you are, like how far you are into your playoffs. With Herter specifically, the Kings do have 4 games next week. So that would make Herter as like an interesting guy to roster next week. But with my hesitation this week, I think I would go ahead and make the move off of Herter if I needed to get the win this week and pick up. I think I would lean towards Naismith over Nembhard. But I think they both take a significant step back. He says that Benedict Mathurin was at shoot around today. Yeah, I think they both take a significant step back as those 2 guys come back, specifically Mathurin. So Naismith would be my choice, but he seems extremely risky. I would rather have a guy like Malik Monk than Naismith, personally, even though Naismith has displayed his upside over the last couple of ball games. So back to the schedule over here. And on quickly, the Knicks, they play. Where are the Knicks? They play Monday, Wednesday, Thursday this week. We could see Jalen Brunson. Maybe he sits out one leg of that back-to-back on Wednesday, Thursday, which boosts quickly. I wouldn't drop quickly and Herter. The Knicks also, they play 4 games next week with no back-to-backs, which might actually be a ding against quickly as opposed to a plus for him, because that means Brunson's probably going to play all 4 of those games. But I wouldn't drop quickly out of those 2 guys. Herter would be the guy. And he says Monk is already gone. Keegan Murray. Yeah, if we get word that Trey Lyles is out, I think that's the piece that you'd be waiting on for Keegan. to see a boost in value. If Trey Lyles gets ruled out tonight, then Keegan Murray becomes an interesting stream for at least this first back-to-back set. I think I would prefer it's close between Naismith and Murray. I think that Murray offers a safer floor if Trey Lyles gets ruled out. And I think Naismith has showed you the ceiling that he possesses over the last 2 games. So maybe his hot shooting streak continues. I would lean Murray, hoping that Trey Lyles is out. That's where I would lean in that situation there. I think that we're chasing stats with Naismith a little too much, in my opinion. So back to the schedule here. We got 12 teams. Like I said, 15 teams on those 4-game week. We got 12 teams on the 3-game week this week. We do have quite a few back-to-back sets among those teams. So for your non-back-to-back sets this week, you got the Boston Celtics, Cleveland Cavaliers, both your LA teams, the Clippers and the Lakers, the Pelicans, the Magic, and the Raptors. All of those teams have no back-to-backs this week. You also have the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Portland Blazers. They don't have any back-to-backs necessarily this week, but they do have a back-to-back over Sunday, Monday. So spanning this week and next week is a back-to-back for both of those teams. Wolves and Blazers definitely have risk of guys sitting out in back-to-back situations. So definitely want to be aware of those. Then Bucks, they got a back-to-back on Friday, Saturday. Knicks, we talked about, they got the back-to-back Wednesday, Thursday. The Suns got one on Friday, Saturday. And then 3 teams that we definitely want to be very weary of this week, we want to stay away from. We already got a question in the chat about Aaron Gordon being one of those guys. That's the Denver Nuggets, the Detroit Pistons, and the Miami Heat. All of those teams only have 2 games this week. Luckily for your Pistons, they're a nightmare of a team to stream right now. Your Jalen Duren, especially with the head injury he suffered, he's probably a drop almost everywhere in redraft leagues. Miami Heat, outside of Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, maybe Tyler Hero, those guys are all pretty much drop worthy. Denver Nuggets, obviously you're not dropping Nikola Jokic. Maybe there's a case to be made for Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., but you're, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, he could probably be kicked to the curb. The only good thing about the Nuggets and the Pistons is they have 4 games on the docket next week. So if your playoffs don't end this week, Nuggets and Pistons looking at favorable schedules next week. Miami unfortunately only has 3 games next week. So Miami is looking at just 5 games over the next 14 days. By far the worst schedule in the NBA over these next 2 weeks. There is no team on the entire NBA slate who has 2 games next week. So we had 3 teams last week with 2 games. We have 3 teams this week with 2 games. I think it was 3 teams even the week before with 2 games on the docket. Next week, we don't have any 2-game stint. So that's good for next week's card. We don't have to worry about 2-game cards. We do have some teams. Actually, I'm just seeing one team that has a 3-game week next week, or 2. The Miami Heat, not only do they play 5 games over the next 14 days, next week they actually have a back-to-back on their 3-game schedule. So that's definitely a team that you want to stay away from a scheduling perspective. Caleb Martin not looking good as an end-of-bench streamer for 12-team leagues. Kevin Love, he could be dropped in favor of guys who are going to give you more games played. The Celtics are the other team. So next week, the Celtics have 3 games on the docket, but they actually have a back-to-back there. You definitely want to be weary. Al Horford, he's going to sit one of those games next week. Robert Williams, we don't know exactly. He's going to sit one of those games for sure if he's healthy, back in action. But Those are the only teams with 3 games on the schedule next week with a back-to-back. All of the other teams who have 3 games next week, they have no back-to-backs. And then there are quite a few teams that have 4 games next week that don't have a back-to-back. I'll just run through those really quickly. The Pacers, the Sixers, the Kings, the Jazz, the Pistons, the Suns, the Knicks. Those are all your teams that have 4 games next week with no back-to-backs. That means they go a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, no back-to-backs, even on the Sunday, Monday overlap between weeks. So those are the teams. I'll go through them one more time real quick. Indiana Pacers, Philadelphia Sixers, Sacramento Kings, Utah Jazz, Detroit Pistons, Phoenix Suns, New York Knicks. Those are your teams that have 4 games the next week with no back-to-back. So Deion Johnson goes on. These are his finals this week. He was asking before if he had Jarrett Allen on and Aaron Gordon back. He's in a head-to-head. He doesn't have anyone for his IR. Are you in a weekly or daily lineup setting, Deion? If you're in a weekly lineup setting, I would make that move, put Jarrett Allen into my starting lineup. If you're in a daily lineup setting, I would punt until tomorrow. If you get word that Jarrett Allen is still out for tomorrow's game, you just keep him tucked in on that IR. You get the Wednesday game from Aaron Gordon. And then I'm going to assume that if Jarrett Allen can't give it a go tomorrow, he'll be back on Thursday. So then you could kick Aaron Gordon off your team on Thursday morning instead of making that move preemptively today. In a daily lineup setting. In a weekly lineup setting, I'm going with the upside that Jarrett Allen has, and I'm putting him into my starting lineup this week, hoping that he goes tomorrow. It seemed pretty encouraging. He practiced today. I mean, maybe the injury report's already out right now, so you guys might know before I do here. But he practiced today. He's supposedly not going to wear protective eyewear if he does play tomorrow, which is interesting. I would think that he would, but I guess that is not in the cards for him if he does play tomorrow. I'm going to guess that he's going to be listed as questionable on the official injury report when that comes out, and I'm going to guess that we're going to have to wait up until game time tomorrow. So weekly lineup setting, yes, I would make that move. Daily lineup setting, I'm going to punt, wait until Tuesday. If Allen is still out, keep him on your IR, play Aaron Gordon Wednesday, and then Allen will be back for you on Thursday. That's when you can kick Aaron Gordon to the curb. Not literally, he's had a terrific season, but for fantasy purposes. And then you could add Allen back to your lineup and have him for the last 2 games of the week. So again, just to recap the main schedule points this week, we got 15 teams playing 4-game weeks. Warriors, Grizzlies got no back-to-backs in that span. Maybe they're rivals, maybe they're not, but they both have 4-game cards without any back-to-backs this week. The only teams that can make that claim. And then the Atlanta Hawks and the Sacramento Kings both have 2 back-to-backs this week. Definitely be fearful of those teams, specifically Kevin Huerter. And then we got 12 teams on 3-game weeks. The teams that don't have a back-to-back in there are your Celtics, Cavs, Clippers, Lakers, Pelicans, Magic, Raptors. We have 3 teams that just have 2 games this week. That's the Denver Nuggets, Detroit Pistons, Miami Heat. Miami in particular has a terrible schedule over the next 14 days with 2 games this week and 3 games next week for a total of 5 games, the fewest in the NBA over this 2-week period. And that 3-game week next week does involve a back-to-back situation. So maybe like a Jimmy Butler, he sits out one of those games, and Jimmy Butler's only looking at 4 games over the next 2 weeks. Really unfortunate situation, but I guess since he already misses games here and there, maybe it's par for the course for those who drafted him. So those are your main takeaways. One other takeaway, there are no teams that have 2 games scheduled next week. and we have quite a few teams that have 4 games next week with no back-to-backs. That's the and you know what? I'll go ahead. I'll name the teams that have 8 games over the next 2 weeks. So they have 4 games this week, 4 games next week. The Chicago Bulls, Dallas Mavericks, although they are a team that has 2 back-to-backs next week. So definitely be a little bit weary of, especially your, Luka Doncic in particular, maybe Kyrie Irving, maybe Christian Wood. Houston Rockets are in that group with 8 games over the next 2 weeks. The Memphis Grizzlies have 8 games over the next 2 weeks. The Oklahoma City Thunder, Philadelphia 76ers, Sacramento Kings, and the Utah Jazz. So again, 8 games over the next 2 weeks. Chicago Bulls, Dallas Mavericks, Houston Rockets, Memphis Grizzlies, Indiana Pacers, Oklahoma City Thunder, Philadelphia 76ers, Sacramento Kings, and the Utah Jazz. I think I might have missed the Pacers there in the first go. So be weary of this week, in particular, those Sacramento Kings. Next week, I would be very weary of the Dallas Mavericks with 2 back-to-backs, and then the Miami Heat have a terrible schedule. So anybody streaming low-end guys on the Heat can make the change now to get more games played. Obviously, this leans head-to-head. I hope this was helpful for your playoff matchup and that we all can get the win this year. Until next week, I'm Steve Vidovich. You can find me on Twitter at Steven Vidovich, and come check out all of our amazing content here at SportsEthos. The YouTube channel has been revamped thanks to Dan Vesperis, and I believe he was live this morning to do his live show. If you guys want to catch Fantasy NBA Today live and get your questions into the legendary Vesperis, I'd recommend to come back on tomorrow morning. I think he usually goes live sometime between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., but if you follow him on Twitter or follow SportsEthos BK on Twitter, then you can find all of our great YouTube content. Thanks very much. Till next week, guys. See you later.